obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 9:30 on Friday the 20th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Ellie Costello. Coming up on the show today.
Double defeat for the Tories. Labour has dealt a double by-election blow to Rishi Sunak by overturning huge Conservative majorities in Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire. Our reporter Jack Carson is in Tamworth.
It's a seat that wasn't meant to be on Labour's radar, but overnight they've taken Tamworth, overturning a 19,000 Conservative majority. Keir Starmer says Labour are redrawing the political map.
And our political editor, Christopher Hope, is in Mid-Bedfordshire.
Mid-Bed goes red for the first time since 1931. When Tory heartland's here, it's a disaster for the Prime Minister.
Tories in turmoil. Do these results overnight indicate the end of Conservative government at the next general election? Well, their party chairman, Greg Hands, doesn't think so.
Well, obviously, these are very disappointing results for us, but by-elections are by-elections. Governments rarely win by-elections.
Chaos and conflict could spread. That's the message from the US President Joe Biden if Congress does not back a $100 billion bill to arm Israel and Ukraine.
Storm Babette strikes. A woman in Scotland is swept to her death, and hundreds are told to evacuate their homes as the storm takes hold. A red weather warning remains in place for parts of Britain. We'll have the latest.
And of course, this show is nothing without your views, opinions and comments. Do email in. gbviews@gbnews.com is the address to get involved in the discussion. But before all of that, let's get your latest news update with Tamsin.
Tom, thanks very much and good morning from the GB Newsroom. Here are the headlines at 9:32. Labour is celebrating a double by-election win after they overturned Conservative majorities. Just a warning of flashing images coming up. In Tamworth, Sarah Edwards secured a win, flipping a more than 19,000 Conservative majority with a significant 23.4% swing to Labour. Meanwhile, Alistair Strathern claimed Mid-Bedfordshire with a 20.5% swing, marking the largest Labour win in a by-election since 1945. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says his party is back in the service of working people. Israel is appearing to be getting closer to a full-scale invasion of the Gaza Strip. Its tanks have been seen near the Gaza border this morning. Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant told troops yesterday they would soon see the Palestinian enclave from inside. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak is travelling to Egypt to prevent further expansion of the Israel-Hamas conflict. The Prime Minister has already met with his Israeli counterpart and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince. In the talks today, he's also expected to stress the importance of preventing further loss of civilian life. At least 9 British nationals have been killed and 7 are missing since the attack by Hamas on October the 7th. Government borrowing was lower than expected last month, standing at £14.3 billion. The Office for National Statistics says that's £1.6 billion less than a year earlier, but it still represented the 6th highest September figure on record. The Chancellor says the government had to borrow during the pandemic to protect livelihoods, but since then, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has pushed up inflation and interest rates. Those are the top stories. You can, of course, get more on all of them. Just visit our website, gbnews.com. Now it's back to Ellie and Tom.
Thanks, Tamsin. Good morning and welcome to Britain's Newsroom. The time is 9:34. You're with myself and Tom. And, of course, we are reflecting that double by-election win by Labour this morning, or last night. Results out early this morning, Mid-Bedfordshire and Tamworth. We're asking you this morning for your reaction to that and what do you think it could mean at the next general election. Do let us know. gbnews@gbnews.com.
Yes, Labour has overturned huge Conservative majorities to win 2 by-elections, both in Mid-Bedfordshire, the former seat of Nadine Dorries, and in Tamworth, which actually is the town where the Conservative Party was first created in 1834 in what was known as the Tamworth Manifesto.
That's very good trivia this morning, Tom. He knows everything. He's like an encyclopedia. But do these historic by-election swings for Labour spell trouble for the Tories? That's what we're asking this morning. We'll go live now to Christopher Hope in Mid-Bedfordshire and Jack Carlson in Tamworth. Good morning to you both. And Chris, let's start with you. Bring us the latest in Mid-Bedfordshire.
Well, we've had Sir Keir Starmer here just a few moments ago. He's now headed north to Tamworth on his victory lap. And we are here in the heart of Tory true blue country. This place hasn't gone red since 1931. This shouldn't really be going into a Labour seat, but it has done overnight. Extraordinary times. Big worries here, I think, for the Tory party as Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, flies back from Saudi Arabia this lunchtime. What does he do about this? All sorts of suggestions from Tory MPs on the sending me WhatsApp saying, let's stop the boats, deal with net migration. But it does feel, in many ways, this is almost the fag end of a long period in office for the Tory party.
Chris, just to stick with you here, how important is it that this is a seat that, of course, was vacated by Nadine Dorries? Are local factors in play here, or is this really a reflection of the national picture?
Tom, you're totally right, of course. It's very hard to judge a national picture from a local by-election. It's worth noting, I think, that the turnout, fell from 74% to just 44%. That says to me that lots of Tory supporters sat on their hands, and you can see why. This MP, Nadine Dorries, was criticised for not being around enough. And also the party has forced out the leader who was voted in by Tory members. Both Liz Truss and Boris Johnson were both forced out by MPs. They've dropped in Rishi Sunak a year ago on Wednesday next week. But members don't really feel that's their person. Of course, from Wednesday, Tory MPs can start putting in letters of no confidence in about Rishi Sunak. The 1 year's grace ends. There could be quite a sticky period going towards Christmas time, I think, for the Prime Minister.
OK, Christopher Hope there for us in Mid-Bedfordshire. Jack Carlson, let's go to you now in Tamworth, where Labour's winner there, Sarah Edwards, has described her result as historic. Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, Pat McFadden, speaking on GB News not long ago, said himself that this wasn't really a seat on their target list. It's thought that it was well over 311th, I think, on the target list of seats for Labour to go for. So it is probably a little bit of a shock for her, particularly of how much she's turned around. Of course, that 19,000 vote majority that Chris Pincher, who of course resigned from this seat in September, did have. That and him as the former MP here, certainly had a factor, I think, in why maybe Conservative voters stayed at home, why their support certainly wasn't as strong. Turnout, as Chris was mentioning, in mid-Bedfordshire was very much a similar factor here in Tamworth as well, only a 35% turnout, so not particularly strong. But Labour still increased their vote share here. They got 45.8% of the vote share here. But interesting to note that the Reform Party, who had a vote share of 5.4%, if obviously those voters had gone towards the Conservatives, they would have still retained this seat. So certainly a problem for the Conservatives is going to be the impact that the Reform Party has in constituencies around the UK as we head closer to a general election. But Sarah Edwards, in her victory speech, said that voters had backed Labour's positive vision and sent a clear message to Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives that they'd had enough of this failed government, which she said had destroyed our public services. She was, of course, part of the NHS. She's a union member. Her family is still within the NHS, so she very much put herself to the people here in Tamworth as somebody that knows what it's like to have to conduct public service day in, day out. But speaking to voters, as I did before this election here, her manifesto very much aligned with the issues that people were taking here, issues of whether this high street can be revived after its redevelopment project, whether, of course, antisocial behaviour could be cut down on the streets, and whether there could be better services with doctors and local GP surgery. So those issues that voters were taking here were very much aligning with the manifesto that Sarah Edwards said she was going to tackle.
Well, Jack, thank you very much for that live in Tamworth, and of course Christopher Hope before there then as well. Thank you both. We'll be back with you throughout the programme as, of course, Sir Keir Starmer makes his tour of his winnings as he is doing this morning. But let's turn now for more analysis to John Oxley, who joins us in the studio, the political commentator, of course. And John, there's a lot of speculation this morning that these are 1996-style by-election wins. Is next year going to be 1997 for the Tories?
I don't think that's guaranteed at this moment, but it's increasingly looking like that is not just one of the possible outcomes, but sort of where the most likely outcome is starting to look. This isn't just two by-elections. We look over back to the Selby result a couple of months ago, even in Uxbridge that the Tories won. They won it by about 500 votes. Really, that was a bad result for them. So more and more of these by-election results are looking like the polling is correct. The Tories really are in trouble in a lot of places where, if they all go against them on the night, then we're into 1997 or possibly even worse territory.
And these results do play into the idea that perhaps Westminster have been underpricing the possibility of a Conservative wipeout election and a Labour wave. I mean, these results would tend to that idea, give that credit. But in the previous by-elections, perhaps there's been too much focus on Uxbridge, for example, and not enough on Selby.
Absolutely. That Selby was a seat that the Conservatives had, again, a sort of historic swing against them, another 23, 24% one, and that was a loss. And Uxbridge, if they'd got 500 votes fewer, they'd have lost it by a couple of percent, and we'd been talking 2 months ago about how badly they are doing everywhere. So I think a lot of focus went on Uxbridge being a success when really it was quite a big failure for the Conservative Party, and it really confirms the trend rather than bucking it.
In a funny sort of way, is this not the worst outcome that could have possibly happened for the Tories then? In the sense that if they'd have just narrowly held on in one or both of these seats, we'd have had a Rishi Sunak comeback narrative. The Tories would be cheering about how well they did, even though they crashed down by tens of thousands of votes. Does this potentially give the Conservative Party an opportunity to sort of wake up, smell the coffee, realise the polls are real, realise how much trouble they're in?
Yes, that's definitely true. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, at the Tory party conference, I was talking to a lot of people, and they were saying, Tory MPs were saying, certainly within the party, even people who didn't buy into themselves, but were saying a lot of people that they speak to are going with this, the polls are wrong, we can still pull it back, we might win a majority, it might be a hung parliament. And I think that position looks harder and harder to defend, and it is a real sign for the Conservative Party that something is going badly wrong and they need to wake up to it. The question is, what do they really do? Because these by-elections show they're losing almost everywhere and they're losing in different directions. These are home county seats where they're hemorrhaging votes to Labour, but also particularly in mid-Bedfordshire, the Lib Dems had a big increase, and there's that threat, particularly in the South East, that they're going to lose a lot of seats that way. And it's quite hard, if you're the Conservative Party, particularly now, to think, how do we put together an argument that pulls in those voters in the Red Wall that gave us a majority last time, but also these voters in the South East who are longer-standing Conservative voters, are maybe a bit more liberal, maybe more likely to have voted Remain. How do we keep them on board at the same time?
Do you think that they are waking up to it, though? You said that the Tories do need to wake up, but the rhetoric this morning is very much that it's not the Labour vote that has changed, it's the Tories have decided to stay at home. They're, of course, blaming low turnout. So how can they best play this now? When would you think they would position a general election to try and turn this around?
I think that's very difficult. I think the big instinct, if you're inside number 10, is to hold on. Yeah. The economy's going to improve, something good's going to happen. But I think with that, you run the problem that the longer you stay on, the more desperate you start to look, the more chance that there are of more by-elections like this. We saw this week, there was a Commons finding against Sir Peter Bone. That might be a by-election. And so it's a really tough call. I think it'd be very brave to go for it in May, which is sort of the first date that looms into view. But I also think if they go on much beyond October, that starts to look very desperate. And then you're running into the possibility of having a campaign this time of year. The weather's already miserable. It gets worse. And I think if I were Labour, the sort of Scrooge Sunak is having an election over Christmas is... that's a gift of a message.
The Tories, of course, criticised Gordon Brown for squatting until the last possible moment the election could be called. I think I'm right in saying the last moment the next election could be held, stretches into January 2025, meaning the campaigning would be over those Christmas weeks. It would be the most extraordinary prospect. Do you think that's a possibility?
I mean, sort of factually it is if they hold on to the last minute, but I think that would be a politically disastrous decision. I think it would only play against the Conservative Party. It would also be very chaotic for everyone involved in organising the election as well, which I think would backfire on them. So I think they probably won't hold on that long, but I think the instinct within number 10 certainly is to hold on at least until the autumn.
OK, John Oxley, always very good to see you. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Well, the US President Joe Biden has addressed Americans last night, where he said that he would ask the US Congress for billions of dollars, $100 billion, for Israel and Ukraine, both to buy weapons and send humanitarian aid to those two countries.
Well, Biden's speech comes after his trip to Israel and after an agreement was reached with Egypt to allow some aid to enter Gaza. Well, we're joined now by our reporter, Charlie Peters from Tel Aviv. Very good morning to you, Charlie. So bring us up to speed with this and Biden's $1 billion request. And the question is, will he get it?
That is a significant conversation in the US, of course, but in Israel, they are keen for whatever support they can receive at the moment as they prepare for that likely ground invasion in the south. We heard from the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, yesterday, who told troops gathering in that convoy that they can see Gaza from afar, but soon they will see it from the inside, and that the order will come. We're also hearing from Shin Bet officials, that's sort of the Israeli MI5 this morning, saying that the plan is to dismantle Hamas entirely, administratively and economically, as well as, of course, the plan to demolish their military capabilities. But there is concern in Israel today, not only about whether or not they can achieve sufficient international support militarily and on a PR front, but also what will happen when that invasion takes place, because it is imminent. They cannot row back on those statements made yesterday, but there are concerns that they haven't made plans for what comes next. What will be the second order effects of moving troops into north of Gaza? Because they've moved so many people to the south, Hamas will almost certainly be down there as well. Will they then have to continue their long and bloody campaign into that part of the territory as well? 500 kilometres of tunnels to clear through. It will be a slow and deliberate and painful action. And there is real concern here that they haven't prepared for that campaign, both from a logistical perspective, sustaining that kind of force is extreme, but also for what plan comes after they move in there, because the Iranians, we have seen in the last 48 hours, Iranian proxies operating very heavily against both Israeli and US forces in the region. In the north this morning, the Israelis have evacuated a town of some 20,000 people as a spark of gunfire and military activity occurs with Lebanese Hezbollah. But also in the last 48 hours, we've counted some 7 attacks on American troops in Iraq and Syria on their bases in the region there. Some successful missile attacks and drone strikes effect on forces gathering in those countries. And last night, a missile launched from Yemen, from the Iran-supported Houthi militia there, was intercepted by a US naval destroyer in the Red Sea. And at the same time, further concerns about the aid situation into the Gaza Strip. We've heard several times now that the Israelis have agreed to allow aid to enter, but there are no reports of that Rafah border crossing opening just yet. Rishi Sunak will be meeting with his counterpart Abdel Fattah el-Sisi today, the president of Egypt, to further push for that humanitarian diplomacy, but there are no clear signs that that will occur. On top of all of these escalating situations and that dire humanitarian situation, there are also protests ongoing throughout the Arab world. Last night, el-Sisi called for protests in the streets of Cairo. For the last 10 years, he's been trying to crack down on those protests, but now he wants people to take to the streets. We were seeing the same in Baghdad, in Beirut, in Libya, and of course also in Amman in Jordan, where fires were lit outside the Israeli embassy. So this is an escalating and very precarious situation for all partners and actors in the region.
Well, Charlie, thank you very much for that. And of course, those 7 attacks on US troops, they feed into that narrative that Joe Biden will be saying later today, that aid is so very necessary to stop this spilling out into much wider and bigger conflicts, dragging perhaps many, many more countries into this crisis. Charlie Peters, live in Tel Aviv, thank you very much.
Now, the powerful Public Accounts Committee said the rollout of smart meters has been unsuccessful.
Well, we're joined now by the Deputy Chair of the Public Accounts Committee, Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, to get more detail on this. But Sir Geoffrey, before we look at your work into the rollout of smart meters, I must get a comment on these 2 disastrous by-elections for your party. Are you heading for electoral wipeout?
Well, by-elections are by-elections, and we've seen this before. I've been in Parliament for 31 years, and what happens in a by-election doesn't often translate in a general election. Having said that, of course, they are disastrous for us, and I would have much preferred that the result had been better. We will need to work hard. Rishi Sunak will need to work hard to convince the British people that he's doing the right thing for the country. But we are, whatever it is, 9 months away from a general election, and if we can do that, I think the general election result would be very much different to what these by-election results are.
The Prime Minister's been in office for a year now. He doesn't seem to have been convincing many voters. Why do you think the next 9 months will be any different from the last 12?
Well, things are beginning to happen in the right direction. Inflation has nearly halved. He will meet his target on that. The economy is showing signs of recovery. If we can move beyond these public sector strikes in the health service and start to actually improve the waiting list there, that will help. And the boat situation, we're awaiting the Supreme Court's decision. But nevertheless, the boat numbers are considerably down this year. The number we're sending back to various countries where we have an agreement with is down. So we are making improvements. But as with all things, there's always a lag between actually making those improvements and the public realising it.
OK, Sir Geoffrey, let's get your reaction now to the delayed smart meter programme. It's failing to hit targets and failing as well to secure public support. What's your reaction to this?
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's what the report says. This, I should caveat everything that I'm going to say on this, is that I'm not in favour of anybody being compelled to have smart meters. But actually, I think what the government needs to do most of all is to carry out an educational programme so that the British public can actually see the benefits of these smart meters. And that is that they're able to take advantage of all the cheaper tariffs. For example, charging your electric car at night when you're using a lot of electricity, when the electricity is cheaper. Also, people will tend with a smart meter to keep a closer eye on how much electricity they're using and probably use a little bit less of it. So there's a win-win here. Consumers are using less electricity and obviously costing less, but also the environment is benefiting because we're not using so much electricity. So I think we need to push this programme, but not actually compel people to do it.
Do you believe that there is a lack of understanding in terms of what smart meters actually are? Some people will hear the word smart and think this is all very technical. Should I really be getting involved here? How would you easily describe a smart meter for someone that perhaps is a bit of a technophobe?
Well, that's a really good question. I think I would describe it as something similar to a thermostat on a boiler, where you can set the time and you can set the day and you can set the temperature. It's no more complicated than that. So anybody who can operate that thermostat will certainly be able to operate a smart meter, and they will be able to get the benefits that I've already described.
Do you think there will be a day, Sir Geoffrey, when every home has a smart meter installed? I mean, Labour government called for it in 2008. They said it would be done by 2019, and here we are in 2023. Only 57% of homes have one.
Well, that's exactly right. I don't know whether we'll ever get to the day when everyone has a smart meter, because for one reason or another, it won't work. But I think we can do substantially better. And we do have a target of 75% by 2025. So I think we've got to actually keep working on this in every way we can. The government have an education program, through the regulator, through every sort of educational way we can, actually increase the number that we've got at the moment. But we do know, as you say, there are technical problems. There are areas where you've got high blocks of flats, for example, in London. In my area, the uptake is very low, I think, because there's a lot of old Cotswold houses with very thick walls. And at the moment, technology is not capable of dealing with that. But I'm sure before very long, we'll be able to overcome those problems.
Well, Sir Geoffrey, thank you very much for joining us this morning and talking through that report. No doubt it will be responded to by government in good time.
Stay with us. We're going to be giving you the latest from the Middle East in just a few moments. First, your weather.
Hello, very good morning to you. I'm Alex Burkle, and here's your latest GB News weather update. Storm Babette has already brought a significant amount of rain, particularly to parts of Scotland, and we have further very wet and windy weather to come as we go through today. Heavy rainfall totals continuing to build up across eastern parts of Scotland in particular. Some severe disruption here, but also heavy rain across parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England into parts of Wales and other areas of Scotland too. Strong gusty winds coming in from the east with gusts of 60-70 miles per hour around eastern coastal parts, adding to the disruption. But temperatures in the south a little bit above average for the time of year, with highs of around 16 or 17 Celsius. The wet and windy weather continues as we go through this evening and overnight, with the weather system continuing to push its way in from the east. As a result, it's always eastern areas which are going to see the heaviest rain, and that's where we're most likely to see the greatest disruption. Again, temperatures aren't going to drop much overnight because of the cloud, the rain, the strong winds. It is going to be a mild night for many, though some clear skies towards the south. As we look towards Saturday and we continue to see some further wet weather pushing its way in from the east, affecting parts of Scotland and northeast England. Not as heavy as I'm expecting through today, but because it's coming so close to the heavy rain we've seen recently, it could cause some further issues. Elsewhere across England, Wales and Northern Ireland, a drier picture, but a scattering of showers and temperatures a little bit above average for the time of year.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app. and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
It's 10 a.m. on Friday, the 20th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Ellie Costello and me, Tom Harwood. Coming up today.
Double defeat for the Tories. Labour has dealt a double by-election blow to Rishi Sunak by overturning huge Conservative majorities in Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire. Our reporter Jack Carson is in Tamworth.
Well, it's a seat that Labour wasn't meant to be on Labour's radar, but overnight Tamworth have taken this seat, overturning that 19,000 vote majority. Keir Starmer says they're redrawing the political map.
And our political editor, Christopher Hope, is in Mid-Bedfordshire.
Mid-Bedfordshire goes red for the first time since 1931. A complete disaster for the Prime Minister, but what should he do next?
But do these results overnight indicate the end of a Conservative government at the next general election? Well, their party chairman, Greg Hands, doesn't think so.
Well, obviously, these are very disappointing results for us, but by-elections are by-elections. Governments rarely win by-elections.
Chaos and conflict could spread. That's the message from US President Joe Biden if Congress does not back a $100 billion bill to arm both Israel and Ukraine.
Storm Babette strikes. A woman in Scotland is swept to her death and hundreds are told to evacuate their homes as the storm takes hold. A red weather warning remains in place for parts of Britain. We'll have the latest.
And of course, we want to hear from you this busy news morning. We'll be getting to your thoughts and comments in a very short while. But remember, the address to email in is gbviews@gbnews.com. Before we get to all of that, here's your latest news update with Tamsin.
Tom, thank you. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 10. The Labour leader says his party has made history after overturning a Conservative majority to win 2 by-elections. Just a warning of flashing images coming up. In Tamworth, Sarah Edwards secured a win, flipping a majority of more than 19,000. Meanwhile, Alistair Strathern claimed Mid-Bedfordshire with a 20.5% swing, marking the largest Labour win in a by-election since 1945. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says his party is back in the service of working people.
Either of these results would have been extraordinary. Both together they are historic. These are seats that we've never won before, or rarely won before, and we've had swings of over 20%, and we've now had 4 by-elections with swings of over 20% if you take Selby and Rutherglen as well. So, you know, that is a very, very important investing of confidence and trust in a changed Labour Party.
Well, Conservative Party Chairman Greg Hand says Labour's wins are not so significant.
Labour hardly improved their vote at all, and in fact went down in mid-Bedfordshire slightly. But I don't think that will have an impact on the general election. Clearly, we need to recognise that a large number of our Conservative voters did not come out yesterday in mid-Bedfordshire and Tamworth, despite having excellent candidates in Festus Akinbusoya and in Andy Cooper. So we need to work harder. We need to make sure that people get the government message that we are delivering against the 5 priorities, making progress.
Israeli troops are mobilising along the border of the Gaza Strip ahead of a possible ground invasion. Tanks, troops and helicopters have been seen near the border this morning. Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant told troops yesterday they would soon see the Palestinian enclave from inside. US President Biden has warned that Hamas and Russia want to annihilate democracy. In a televised speech from the White House, Joe Biden urged the Congress and the American people to support billions of dollars in military support for Israel and Ukraine. The president also stressed the urgency of getting relief to Palestinian civilians in Gaza who lack food, water and medicine.
The security package I'm sending to Congress and asking Congress to do is an unprecedented commitment to Israel's security that will sharpen Israel's qualitative military edge, which we've committed to, the qualitative military edge. We're going to make sure Iron Dome continues to guard the skies over Israel. We're going to make sure other hostile actors in the region know that Israel is stronger than ever and prevent this conflict from spreading.
Israel says it's ordered the evacuation of residents from a northern town close to the Lebanese border. More than 20,000 people live in Kiryat Shimona, which is about a mile from the border fence. The decision to evacuate comes after days of clashes with Hezbollah fighters. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak is travelling to Egypt to prevent further expansion of the Israel-Hamas conflict. The Prime Minister has already met with his Israeli counterpart and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince. In the talks today, he's also expected to stress the importance of preventing further loss of civilian life. At least 9 British nationals have been killed and 7 are missing since the attack by Hamas on October the 7th. To other news now. Minimum service levels are set to be introduced in schools and colleges in England. The government says the proposals will protect children's education during any future strike action. It follows the industrial action last academic year, which saw 10 days of disruption. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan says how long the plans will take to implement.
I've invited the unions in to have a discussion because we have worked well together to end industrial action, to bring the biggest pay rise that teachers have had in history, and also to introduce a minimum starting salary of £30,000. So we have worked together and we're working together on reducing workloads. So I have invited the unions in and hope that we have the common interest of protecting children's education. During the strike action, we lost 25 million days of education, and the impact on children is just too much.
More than 1,600 suspected members of County Lines drug gangs have been arrested in 1 week across England and Wales. The operation seized drugs worth £1.2 million, along with cash and 100 kilos of cannabis. Around 58 children were referred for possible exploitation by the gangs. The action also closed 250 phone lines and seized more than 400 weapons, which included firearms and knives. A red weather warning remains in place for parts of Scotland as Storm Babette continues to sweep across the UK. A 57-year-old woman lost her life in Glen Esk after being swept into a river yesterday. Amber warnings for wind and rain remain in northern England, the Midlands and northern Wales, and a yellow warning has also been issued for Northern Ireland. Evacuations are underway in Scotland with severe flood warnings also in place, along with the threat of power cuts. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Ellie and Tom.
Thanks, Tamsin. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Harwood and me, Ellie Costello. The time is 7 minutes past 10 and loads of you have been emailing in this morning in reaction to those by-election results last night, this morning. The double win for Labour. Tom has been looking through the emails. He hasn't put the names of who these people are, so I'm going to blame you for that.
Yeah,
Tom.
entirely my fault. I was so excited there were so many. Oh no, yeah.
I know
John.
the top one, John, because you've included your name within the email body, saying I'm a Tory voter, and it really gets my goat when you get the Tory chairman saying it's only a by-election. They do not get the depth of feeling in this country, and this Tory party is worse than John Major's one. I think they're on for a bit of a beating, like when Tony Blair beat them. It's fair to say, only a by-election, while voters are coming back and they're taking our vote for granted.
Well, Sue has written in to say, at 72, I've lived through quite a few general elections and find by-elections quite amusing. All parties over-egg their success. In Mid-Beds, for instance, Labour are trumpeting overturning a Tory majority of 25,000 when huge numbers of Tories stayed at home. More often than not, these overturned majorities go back to the original party again at the time of general elections. That's what Sue thinks.
Yeah, and we don't have a name on this one, but thank you if you emailed this in saying, what you have witnessed in these by-elections is what happens when a party takes their voters for granted. These are big losses, but luckily they are by-elections, but they're sending a clear message that the Conservative Party needs to buck up its ideas and fulfil their promises. Rishi Sunak should have learnt from Boris. Never make promises you cannot keep.
Well, of course, many more views coming in, and we will get to as many as we can throughout the programme. But this is a political earthquake, so says the leader of the Labour Party. And in Mid-Bedfordshire, Alistair Strathern took the seat with the majority of 1,192 over his Tory rival. He told GB News that he was ready to get to work.
I'm just so humbled and grateful because this has been such a big campaign for me. I grew up around here, this area means so much to me, and to see people across these towns and villages placing their faith in me today has just been so exhilarating, and I'm going to be working incredibly hard from tomorrow to show them they made the right choice.
Well, in Tamworth, Labour's Sarah Edwards defeated Tory Andrew Cooper by a majority of 1,316 votes. While speaking after the declaration, she said the public has had enough of cuts to public services.
Tonight, the people of Tamworth have voted for Labour's positive vision and a fresh start. They've sent a clear message to Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives that they have had enough of this failed government which has crashed the economy and destroyed our public services.
Well, we're very lucky now to be sat next to GB News' deputy political editor at a time like this. Tom, how significant is this, do you think, for the Tories? Let's start with.
Well, I think the key lesson here is that the polls are not wrong. We've been talking for the last year about the 10 or 20-point lead that the Labour Party has, as if it's some sort of magic, ethereal thing. This is real-world data showing that the Labour Party really is that far ahead, and that this enormous lead, when it presents itself in real-world electoral events, is presenting itself as the Labour Party taking these seats that in some cases it's never held before, in other cases is only won with landslides. And as many commentators have been saying throughout the day, throughout the morning, this is exactly the pattern that we saw in 1996, in the run-up to that 1997 general election victory for the Labour Party. Now, it could be the case that things turn around in the next 8 months, 9 months. It could be the case that the polls change. But you'd have to see something pretty huge and seismic to shunt those polls, because they haven't really moved, not moved by any significant degree in the last 12 months.
I mean, it has been absolutely extraordinary run, really, for Starmer and Labour. We've had Rutherglen, Selby, Mid-Beds. It is mid-1990s territory, if you think about it like that. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer saying now that nowhere is off limits for the Labour Party. Is he right in that, do you think?
Well, I mean, looking at the two seats that we've seen last night, Tamworth was held by the Labour Party as recently as 2005, but it has been trending away from the Labour Party demographically. There's older voters who live there, which means that generally on current polling, that's more likely to vote Conservative. So this shows that the Labour Party can tap in to those sorts of voters. And then in mid-Bedfordshire, classic home county sort of seat, never held by the Labour Party since the mass franchise came about, and really deep true blue territory. If the Labour Party is winning in these places, it does lend credence to that theory that the Labour Party can win in more places. Crucially, it undermines the Lib Dem message that only the Lib Dems can win in these sorts of seats. It seems like the Labour Party can now too.
Yeah, and really interesting that you touch upon the Lib Dems there, because there is a story, isn't there, about them underperforming in these by-elections. Do let us know what you make of that as well. gbnews@gbnews.com. But first of all, let's go live now to the ground. Christopher Hope is there in mid-Bedfordshire, and Jack Carson is there for us in Tamworth. Good morning to you both. And Chris Hope, let's start with you in mid-Bedfordshire, where I believe Sir Keir Starmer has just been there on his victory lap.
That's right, he's driving now north to Tamworth. I mean, he can't believe his luck, can he? This seat here, mid-Bedfordshire, going Labour for the first time since 1931. Extraordinary times here. And as I think as the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, flies back from Saudi Arabia this lunchtime, he's got a lot to think about. Now, I've got some Tory WhatsApps here. People Tory MPs telling me that colleagues are in shock. They hope the polls were wrong. There's an ominous silence. And that silence is because on Wednesday next week, MPs can start to resubmit letters of no confidence in the Prime Minister, the Tory leader, after 1 year's grace since he was appointed. And will they try and do that? They may try and put these letters in to make him almost to wake up to the problems the Tory party has got out here in the country. There's big issues here. We've got meant to be a reshuffle next week. Will that happen? We're not sure. Big concerns from the Tory party in the grassroots. They look here at those numbers in mid-Bedfordshire. The Reform Party, run by Richard Tice, the GB News presenter, took 1,800 votes. Had those votes not gone to the Reform Party, had gone to the Tory party, the Tories would have won. I think the same is true in Tamworth, and that's the problem here. The Reform is offering a slate of policies to the right of the party. Is that where the Tories need to go now? Just finally, one MP sent me a list of what to do next. The idea of things to stress for the Tory government: stop the boats, we know that one; curb net migration; ditch the ban on gay conversion therapy, which may be coming shortly; tax cuts for small businesses; and tax cuts for families. That's where the party's going to go over the next few months. The party will probably go towards the right to try and find some way to enthuse the voters to get out, because the turnout here was 44%, not 74%. That means that Tory MPs, Tory members, are sitting on their hands. They're not voting. They don't want to vote for the Tory party. How can Sunak fix that?
Wednesday this week, where those new no-confidence letters could go in. Just finally with you, Chris, do you think there's actually an appetite to change over Prime Minister yet another time? 6 different Prime Ministers in the last 5 years.
The answer to that probably is no, Tom, for a relief for you and me and maybe the viewers. I think what they might try and do, MPs who are a bit angry about Rishi Sunak's leadership, and don't forget he only became Prime Minister on Tuesday next week. 1 year ago, Liz Truss disappeared off this time last year. They want to see some idea that he's listening. They tell me that there's a feeling there's a clique around the PM, that they can't get the word in edgeways. They want to be listened to. Often the only way to get their attention is to put in these letters of no confidence. And if 15% of MPs do it, then there might well be a vote of no confidence in the PM, the Tory leader, before Christmas. The problem they've got is there's no one to replace him, but it might be a protest vote.
OK, Christopher Hope there for us in mid-Bedfordshire. Thank you very much. Let's cross over now to Jack Carson in Tamworth for us. Good morning to you, Jack. And absolutely fascinating, isn't it, in Tamworth? Because as you've been saying this morning, this was a seat that wasn't even on the Labour Party's radar.
Yeah, that's right. Pat McFadden on GB News this morning said that it wasn't on their radar. It wasn't one of their key target seats. I think that's basically because, of course, since this seat went blue back with David Cameron in 2010, they've ever increased that Conservative majority. Chris Pincher, as the MP, was ever increasing his majority, and it stood at 19,600 votes before, of course, yesterday. But with a combination, as Chris was mentioning, of low turnouts, but also, of course, Conservative Party voters sitting on their hands, it has meant that Labour has been able to overturn that overnight. And Keir Starmer, now on his way to Tamworth, as Chris said, can't believe they took 45.8% of the vote share. It was a swing of around 24%, so a huge swing. But voters on the ground here that I've been speaking to this morning aren't necessarily surprised that this has been the case. In the recent local elections here with the council, more Labour councillors that were voted onto that council recently, as well as the council by-election, that was also the case. So voting maybe here swinging towards Labour over the past few months. But speaking to the voters I did before that by-election yesterday, many of them were picking up on points that Sarah Edwards had put in her local manifesto, the issues that she said she was going to tackle. Particularly, voters are still concerned around the high street here, the shops that are closing, antisocial behaviour. The police station in this town was shut down not long ago, so it doesn't have its own police station anymore. So there's lots of key local issues that people were very annoyed about, that the Conservative MP, Chris Pincher, before, of course, he resigned back in September, wasn't sorting out, and they didn't feel like they were being represented. So that's perhaps one of the reasons behind, of course, why they've gone for this change. But Sarah Edwards, in her acceptance speech yesterday, did say that voters here backed Labour's positive vision for the country. She said this is a clear message to Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives as well. Keir Starmer, of course, on his way here, I'm sure he'll reiterate that message that he said this morning, that he feels Labour are redrawing the political map. Doesn't feel like that long ago that was Boris Johnson saying that after his big election win in 2019. So Labour's starting to claw back some ground in these key areas, of course, that if they can keep hold of them in a year's time, when we have that general election, they could be set for a majority government.
Absolutely extraordinary. It does not feel like only 4 years ago that Boris Johnson absolutely swept the map, painted parts of the country blue that had never been blue before. It feels like the pendulum is swinging back ever faster these days. But both Jack Carson and Chris Hope, thank you very much for joining us this morning and talking through those seismic results.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's go now to Scarlett Maguire, the pollster, who joins us now for further analysis. Very good morning to you, Scarlett. So what do you make of these results overnight? I mean, it suggests, doesn't it? Well, it proves, really, that the polls are right, that Labour are way out ahead.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So this was a very good night for Labour, a very bad night for the Conservatives. I actually think, because we've seen so many of these big losses recently from the Conservatives, that it's inured us slightly to just how bad a set of results these are. So we've sort of got used to these, over 20-point swings away from them. But it is extraordinary. And I know that Tom mentioned that this is exactly the sort of thing Tony Blair was doing in the run-up to 97. It's absolutely right, but he's even doing it at a greater pace. So it is sort of confirming what we're seeing at the polls. But then on a more detailed level, it's really confirming what we're seeing, in that the loss being inflicted on the Conservatives is not so much people going to Labour en masse, but really disaffected Conservative voters. So those people who voted Conservative in 2019 just not coming out to vote for this party. And I think what should be really worrying the government at the moment is there's no particular signs they'll come home right now.
I wonder if we're looking at the next, whenever the next election might be, the next 9 months, perhaps even the next 12 months, is that enough time for things to turn around? Are there any indications in what we've seen in the last 12 months that things could tighten? Because from where I'm sitting, things have been incredibly flat in the polls. No matter what Rishi Sunak tries to do, things really aren't budging very much at all.
Yeah, I mean, I do actually think that's right. So obviously Rishi Sunak came in when the government was doing incredibly badly in the polls. I mean, there were sort of 30 plus points behind under Truss. He narrowed the polls, 20 points. We were even getting much closer, more like sort of maybe 12, 15. And there was a sense that maybe this could really tighten for the election. That's now looking quite unlikely. Now, some tightening, I think, will be expected because they'll think some of these sort of don't knows, these Conservative don't knows, might come home. But yeah, it looks like it's a phenomenally difficult task. And I think the problem is, so next 12 months is not very long. And I think what the public are really feeling, this is not so much, I think, a personal vote on Rishi Sunak, although he's also not managed to win people around personally, but it's a vote on the state of the country. And, you know, when you go to focus groups all over the country, when you sort of listen to voters, they have this real sense that they are poorer than they were a few years ago, that the NHS is in a worse state, that they're not happy with the immigration system, how it is. And so you'd have to see quite dramatic turnarounds in really quite a short amount of time, I think, for the Conservatives to be in with a chance.
It's that age-old Ronald Reagan 1984 question. Do you feel better off than you did just 4 short years ago? Perhaps a very different question this year that Brits would answer than the Americans did in 1984. Scarlett Maguire, thank you very much for talking us through what perhaps is a very bad day for the Conservatives and a very good day for the polling industry.
Yeah, how much has changed, hasn't it, in the last 4 years? Do keep your views coming in, gbnews@gbnews.com. But do stay with us. Still to come, a woman has been swept to her death in a river after unprecedented rainfall hit Scotland. We'll be going live to our reporter Tony Maguire, who'll have the latest for us.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's. on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 10:26 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Ellie Costello and me, Tom Harwood.
Now, the US President Joe Biden addressed Americans last night where he said he would ask US Congress for billions of dollars. How much, Tom?
$100 billion. Sounds like one of those numbers that you'd hear in Austin Powers and those silly movies where they sort of make up unimaginable amounts of money, but $100 billion.
Yeah, it's about 87 million.
Billion
pounds, isn't it? Yes.
The pound is still just worth more than the dollar, despite the last few years we've had.
Just about. But that money is going to go to Israel and Ukraine to buy weapons and send humanitarian aid to both of those countries.
Well, we're joined now by our reporter Charlie Peters, live from Tel Aviv. And Charlie, we hear that you've just returned from an Israeli Defense Force conference. What did they say?
Well, one of the serious questions put to the IDF by journalists gathering this morning was about aid crossing into the Gaza Strip. We have heard so much, of course, since this conflict began, back and forth discussions about whether Israel and Egypt will maintain that partial blockade or whether or not they will allow aid in. 2 days ago, we reported that Benjamin Netanyahu had agreed to allow aid to enter, but since then, there has been no movement on the Rafah crossing. And in the last half hour, an IDF spokesman said that that situation was still to be determined. Yesterday, Rishi Sunak thanked the Prime Minister of Israel for agreeing to allow aid in, but for all the talk, there has been no movement. We've seen dozens of trucks gathering on the Egyptian side, as reported damage to the roads leading into the Rafah crossing have still yet to be dealt with. There's been shelling in that area on top of airstrikes in the region as well. So a very significant moment for whether or not aid can enter, because of course the IDF has asked the best part of 1 million people to flee from the north to the south, and they've also asked foreign nationals to gather in the south, the US and the UK both expecting their people to be allowed to exit from that Rafah crossing into Egypt. It's highly unlikely that any Palestinians will exit because that is a red line for Egypt and Jordan and indeed other Arab powers here. They don't want to see Palestinians leave the Gaza Strip because they think that once they're out, they won't be allowed to go back in. But the IDF saying that great efforts are being made to ensure that foreign nationals at least can leave the Gaza Strip. We await further updates.
And Charlie, you have been at that conference this morning of the IDF. Now, of course, they're not going to be sharing their operational plans with the press, but how likely do you think, what sense do you get of a ground offensive by Israel? We've been talking about it for about 8 days now, haven't we? The troops gathering on the border there, but how likely do you think there will be that ground offensive, and how would that take place?
I think it is highly likely now. Yesterday we had statements from Yoav Gallant, the defence minister, telling troops gathering in that convoy on the border that they can see Gaza from afar, but soon they will see it from the inside, adding that the order will come. Those kind of statements you really can't row back from in a time of war. So it feels highly likely that that invasion is going to come. Tonight is Friday night, of course, it'll be Shabbat night, and tomorrow the Jewish holiday, so highly unlikely to see movements in the next 24 hours. But every moment they get to gather and prepare for that invasion is a benefit to the Israelis as they can prepare for the sustainment and the shaping part of a ground invasion. More bombardments required, more logistical supplies required, and also the preparation and practice for troops on the ground. But at the same time, this is a benefit to Hamas at the same time, because they are developing their defences inside that most densely populated part of the world, some 500 kilometres of tunnels underground. If it is an invasion, it will be slow and deliberate, because there will be obstacles and suicide bombers and booby traps and bombs littered all over the streets of North Gaza. There are also significant numbers of civilians remaining in North Gaza who will almost certainly be used as human shields by the terrorists remaining there. The fighting that we will see there will be extremely bloody, and IDF soldiers I've spoken to expect to be engaged in hand-to-hand combat, fighting door-to-door, house-to-house. So a extremely precarious and long war on the horizon.
Really stark reporting there, Charlie Peters. Of course, we know that urban warfare is amongst the most dangerous form of warfare, and it appears to be getting ever closer still. Charlie Peters, live from Tel Aviv. We thank you for your reporting.
Yes, thank you very much, and do stay safe. Well, still to come, we're going to be talking about that double defeat for the Tories. More fallout after Labour has dealt a double by-election blow to Rishi Sunak by overturning huge Conservative majorities in Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire.
And Wagatha Christie returns. Colleen Rooley says that she was forced to expose Rebecca Vardy because repeated leaks about her personal life just wouldn't stop. She says this in her new Netflix documentary.
And if you caught the doc, you might have seen a familiar face. It's me. Quite a lot in the third episode, which was a surprise to lots of people, including myself.
No, they use lots of clips of you reporting from outside the courtroom, which is marvellous.
And my voice a lot in the commentary as well. I kind of narrated, I think, a lot of the third episode.
Well, we'll be having a look at that a lot more, and of course, much more of that after your morning news with Tamsin.
Tom, thank you. Here are the headlines at 10:32. The Labour leader says his party has made history after overturning a Conservative majority to win 2 by-elections. Just a warning of flashing images. In Tamworth, Sarah Edwards secured a win, flipping a majority of more than 19,000. Meanwhile, Alistair Strathern claimed Mid-Bedfordshire with a 20.5% swing, marking the largest Labour win in a by-election since 1945. Israeli troops are mobilising along the border of the Gaza Strip ahead of a possible ground invasion. Tanks, troops and helicopters have been seen near the border this morning. Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant has told troops they would soon see the Palestinian enclave from inside. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak is travelling to Egypt to prevent further expansion of the Israel-Hamas conflict. The Prime Minister has already met with his Israeli counterpart and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince. In the talks today, he's also expected to stress the importance of preventing further loss of civilian life. At least 9 British nationals have been killed and 7 are missing since the attack by Hamas on October the 7th. And more than 1,600 suspected members of county lines drug gangs have been arrested in 1 week across England and Wales. The operation seized Class A drugs worth more than £1 million and cash of the same value. Around 58 children have been referred to safeguarding services for possible exploitation by the gangs. The action also closed 250 phone lines and seized more than 400 weapons, which included firearms and knives. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2127 and €1.1453. The price of gold is £1,636.92 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,465 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come, this morning the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has commented on the situation in the Middle East. We'll bring you that very shortly.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good morning, it's 10:38. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Howard and me, Ellie Costello. Now, Colleen Rooney's new documentary has dropped on Disney+, and it's reignited the Wagatha Christie Chronicles. Remember that? With new scandals and gossip.
I have to say, it is the best title, best story title, I think, of any story I've covered in the last 2.5 years on this channel. But you might have seen a familiar face cameoing. That's an interesting word to say. Cameoing. Throughout the documentary. I wonder which face that might have been. Well, joining us to discuss this and reveal all is showbiz reporter Ellie Phillips. And Ellie Phillips, before we get into the meat, the substance of the documentary, it's another Ellie who keeps popping up throughout this documentary.
Oh, this was so funny, Tom. I was at the premiere in Liverpool that I actually hosted on Wednesday night. And I'm here in Liverpool now, which is why it's so dark. We're at the Titanic Hotel, which is notoriously dark. I'm watching the documentary. Part 3 comes on. And genuinely, every 5 minutes, Ellie Costello's on screen. And I'm like, this is Ellie Costello presents Wagatha Christie. It's crazy. It was so good to see. It was all her reporting from when she covered the trial for GB News. And yeah, it was really well done. And it was just really great to see quite a few actual faces of GB News. But in particular, Ellie was throughout the whole of episode 3.
Well, Ellie, I've got to thank you because it was actually you who's live texting me, it must be said, from the premiere to say, Ellie, you are all across this 3rd episode. I had absolutely no idea. So thank you, Ellie, for flagging that one. It was the most remarkable case, wasn't it? And you can see why it's become a documentary because there is just so much to unpack. And you hosted the premiere of the documentary. What did you make of it?
Yeah, the documentary is amazing. It's so well done. It's so well put together. The production companies behind it have wanted to do this since 2016, 2017. And it was actually, they were trying to get Colleen on board. And then when this Agatha Christie scandal happened, I think she felt like actually maybe is now the right time, because there is something I want to say. I want to put my message across. I don't think a 5-minute interview on television is going to do justice to what I want to people to understand about what she went through. And she did actually go through a lot, and it explains it really well, because it's 3 parts. The first part goes into her history, how she became this incredibly loyal person with her upbringing in Liverpool, working class family. The second part was all about the trap. And then the third part was all about the trial. So it segments it really well and takes you on this journey that she went through. And you understand why it was so traumatic to her, because, you know, to feel that someone's leaking your private information and you don't know who it is, and it just feels very uncomfortable, and then you're paranoid about other people. It really, really impacted her. But now I think she feels like she's come out the other side of it. Everyone else has had their say. It's like, I think it's time people hear my side of the story. And I've got to say, I love that Rebecca Vardy tried to what's it called? They got the IP of Agatha Christie, so no one could use it. So that's why Colleen called it the real Agatha story. So she got around it.
So interesting that you can copyright such a ubiquitous phrase. But we do have a little clip of the trailer for this documentary series. Let's just have a little look-see.
Have you still got the post on your phone?
Yeah.
Can we see it?
They're my words. And I stick by them.
Agatha Christie starts today at the High Court.
Fellow wags and former friends embroiled in a bitter row.
I haven't actually watched it yet, Ellie, so I do need to sit down and actually watch all 3 episodes. So I'm looking forward to it. Tell us, because you were hosting the premiere, you were alongside Colleen Rooney herself. Give us the inside scoop. What does she make of the whole scandal now that it's all behind her, the whole saga? And what was she telling you on the night?
I think genuinely she was a bit traumatised by it all. She never expected for a post on social media to be something that landed her in court. And I think she's just very happy and very grateful that the truth came out in the end. And you see how much Rebecca Vardy's lawyers tried to use fairly underhand tactics to try and force her team into settling, to make her think, oh, maybe you don't have enough evidence, and maybe we have more than you have, when they didn't really have that. And I think now she feels vindicated, but I think she feels sad still that Rebecca still won't own up to it, because a lot of people ask, you know, of Colleen, why do you forgive Wayne for all his indiscretions and everything he's done? But for Colleen, she's like, if someone can hold their hands up and say, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, I own it, she can forgive and move on. And she's always had that from Wayne in the things that he's done that, you know, other people might not forgive. Colleen's a very forgiving person, but with Rebecca Vardy, I think the fact that she still denies what she's done is quite hard for Colleen in a way, because she just doesn't understand that. Everyone knows you did it. Just admit to it, own up, and we'll all move on, and I'll probably forgive you.
It's extraordinary that she hasn't owned up to it after a court case, after conclusive social media posts, after what feels like years. It probably hasn't been years. It's probably been about a year. But Ellie Phillips, thank you so much for talking us through all of that saga in this new exciting documentary series.
Yeah, she's had a very busy few days, Zara Ellie Phillips. Thank you very much, Ellie, for that. Now, in the past hour, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has commented on the situation in the Middle East. Here's what he had to say.
I think any effort to ensure there isn't any escalation is obviously welcome. I think there are 2 priorities now, urgent priorities. The first is Hamas must release the hostages who are being held in Gaza. And secondly, urgently, we need that humanitarian aid to get in. The food, the water, the fuel, the medicines. Obviously, there's been some progress, but much more is needed. It's urgent. There are, many innocent civilians in Gaza. It's a humanitarian crisis. There's 1 million children, and that aid desperately and urgently needs to get in.
Does Israel have a right to embark upon a ground invasion of Gaza?
Well, Israel has the right to defend herself. And obviously there are hostages still being held. But whatever action is taken, has to be in accordance with international law. I think that's a very clear framework, and Israel is bound by that international law.
But to be explicit, that's you acknowledging and accepting that it is justified for them to go in.
Well, look, it's for Israel to decide what the response should be. They do have a right to self-defense, and more than that, there are, up to 200 Israelis still being held hostage. Of course, Israel has to do all that it can to get those hostages back safely, and in good shape. But of course, equally, that has to be done in accordance with international law.
Sir Keir Starmer there speaking in the last few minutes. Just to reiterate, he said that number one, hostages must be released. Number two, aid must get to people in Gaza. And he also said that Israel has a right to defend itself, but must do so in accordance with international law. Well, we're joined now by the former government special advisor, Charlie Rowley, and the author and journalist, Hilary Freeman. And Hilary, let's start with you. This is a very, very tense time, obviously, and we've seen, I think, politicians in this country, to some extent, try and balance things, talking perhaps more so about the rights of people in Gaza who are caught up in all of this than perhaps some other countries are.
So what do you mean some other countries?
So, for example, looking at the political discussion in the United States of America, it will be much more focused on Israeli hostages and Israel. In this country, the conversation seems to lean more into international law and potentially the rights of Palestinians in Gaza.
Well, yes, I mean, it certainly feels like that to the Jewish community here. There seems to be a lot of pussyfooting around actually condemning Hamas, which is, making people feel very insecure indeed. Obviously, it is really important that international law is kept, and it's very important that people who are in a humanitarian crisis in Gaza are helped. But that shouldn't be at the expense of Israel, and it shouldn't be at the expense of the Jewish community in this country who are being attacked.
Charlie Rowley, let's bring you in at this point. Get your reaction to Sir Keir Starmer speaking there, making very, very clear that he wants to see those hostages released, up to 200 of them being held in Gaza, and aid needs to be allowed into Gaza as well. What did you make of what he said?
I thought what he said was absolutely right, and I think we can all agree with that, because it's vital that, yes, those hostages, these are innocent people, regardless of their religion or where they live. They are innocent people. It is civilians that will always be caught up in these terror conflicts and these terror zones. So they must be released, and you must make sure that aid does get to the people that need it the most. I absolutely agree with what Hilary was saying a second ago. It was a terrorist attack by a terrorist organisation, a prescribed terrorist group under UK law. So we need to call it out for what it is, and we shouldn't be absolutely, as Hilary said, pussyfooting around the subject. But that doesn't come at the expense of those innocent people on the ground. We must make sure that those people are protected and looked after as best we can, because there are British citizens in Israel that were caught up in that terror attack. But there will also be innocent Palestinians, yes, in Palestine, in Gaza, that should not be or not have their lives put at risk because of this conflict.
Now, of course, we're looking at pictures of the Prime Minister's visits to Israel yesterday. He then went on to Saudi Arabia, met with Mohammed bin Salman, is now in Egypt for meetings as well. How important is the delicate balance of all of these other countries in the region, some which are sort of leaning towards a Western view of things? I know that Jordan's in a very precarious position, sort of balancing these issues, and potentially this whole saga was started because of what people expected to be a normalisation of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there is an argument that the Hamas attack happened in order to destabilise, with the Abraham Accords happening, with countries around Israel becoming more friendly to Israel. It's not in their interest for that to happen. So, yeah, it is a tinderbox. But I think that many of the countries around Israel don't like Hamas any more than Israel do. And the fact that we're talking about aid getting to the Palestinians, why hasn't the aid come in from Egypt? Because Egypt doesn't want to open their borders and let Hamas in. That's the reason.
Hilary, you talked there about it being a tinderbox. Are you concerned now, especially looking towards a ground invasion by Israel into Gaza. Do you fear that this will get much bigger, that this will be a regional conflict with the players in the Middle East surrounding Israel?
Well, I very much hope not. I mean, obviously, the other issue is the fact that, you know, we know that Iran funds Hamas. We know that Russia supports, you know, Hamas. We know that China does. I mean, you know, the implications of this could be absolutely, huge and very, very worrying. But I hope that isn't the case. I hope that there are, you know, diplomatic efforts to stop it becoming World War III. And I don't think that will happen. But yeah, it is potentially very, very worrying.
I should explain to those listening on the radio, we're currently looking at pictures of the Israel-Lebanon border. So this is the border where Hezbollah are operational. And it looks like there have been a series of explosions on this border. We're just seeing the aftermath, the smoke rising from the ground. Charlie Rowley, we know that Hezbollah is better funded than Hamas. They've got more sophisticated weaponry, are closer to Iran. How concerned should we be? Are we being too focused on Gaza when actually it could be the Lebanon-Israel border that lights up into open warfare first?
I think that's absolutely right. And, you know, it just shows how delicate the whole region is and how delicate the situation is, which is why the Prime Minister is absolutely right to be in Saudi Arabia, which is why I think it was right that President Biden, what good that did, we'll have to wait and see, but, you know, he went, and that's a good thing. So all international diplomatic efforts are vital because, again, just agreeing with Hillary, you've got to, you know, remember why Hamas has carried out the attack that it did was to completely destabilise, which was a slow and steady, yes, but progressive process to bring about, you know, more peace than what you might have seen yesterday, 6 months, 2 years ago. So it was, you know, steady progress. Hamas have totally usurped that process because they want to destabilise the region. So you have to have a tough conversation with Israel to say, you know, don't make yourself look to the international community. Don't bring more conflict upon yourself by overreacting. Of course, you've got a right to defend yourself. And the reason why it's so complicated is because, yes, Hezbollah are absolutely better funded, better organised, but Hamas are integrating themselves as terrorists within the community. They are hard to root out. That's why it will be, I think, much more dangerous in the coming days and weeks, because if there is going to be a ground invasion by Israel, they want to go and root out Hamas terrorists, as they absolutely should. But the tactics of Hamas, integrating themselves in the communities, in schools, in hospitals, in the local area, they will be very, very difficult to find, which means there will be more casualties and innocent civilians will get caught up in this. But we need to have a whole international community approach to bring this conflict to an end.
And we only need to see how guerrilla warfare really plays out. I mean, it seems like a silly comparison to make, really, but Vietnam was a very good example of a poorly resourced army because they were so embedded throughout lots of different areas. They could wreak absolute havoc. We will keep across what is going on currently live on the Israel-Lebanon border. If any more developments happen, we will of course bring them to you live. But let's now turn to what has happened closer to home. A reaction, if you would, Hilary Freeman, of these two seismic by-election wins by the Labour Party last night.
Well, I think it was more of a loss for the Conservatives than it was a win for Labour. I think people are just voting against the Conservatives now, not surprisingly after the amount of years we've had of just incompetent government. And I think, Rishi Sunak isn't incompetent like his predecessors, but I think it's a little bit too little too late, and the economy is in such a state and people have just had enough. They want a change.
Charlie Tamworth, the second best by-election swing to Labour of all time, and Mid Beds has been Conservative since 1931. How worried are the Tories going to be now?
Well, there's significant losses. There's no getting away for that. I mean, obviously, the turnout in by-elections is a lot lower. I think, hopefully, well, when it comes to a general election, all the Conservatives can do now is do what I think Greg Clark was right to say, work harder, make sure that the government is getting its message out there to ensure that when it comes to the general election, those Conservative voters who didn't turn out in these elections do turn out at a general election. The circumstances in which both of them were called about, I think did play a factor into it. I mean, if I was in Mid Beds, I'm not quite sure whether I'd be able to support the Tory party given the circumstances. But a lot of work to be done, and we'll just have to wait and see when it comes to the general election.
Strong words. Well, Charlie Rowley and indeed Hilary Freeman, thank you very much for talking through those big issues this morning. What a busy news day it is.
It has been a very busy news day. Well, up next, we're going to be speaking to political mastermind and Tom's hero, Sir John Curtis. You don't want to miss that.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 11 a.m. Should we do it together on Friday the 20th of October? This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, as you can see, with Tom Harwood and me, Ellie Costello, coming up for you today.
Double defeat for the Tories. Labour has dealt a double by-election blow to Rishi Sunak, overturning huge Conservative majorities in both Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire.
But do these results overnight indicate the end of the Conservative government at the next general election? Well, their party chairman, Greg Hands, doesn't think so.
Well, obviously, these are very disappointing results for us, but by-elections are by-elections. Governments rarely win by-elections.
The Israel Defense Force held a press conference this morning whilst Israeli troops are mobilising on the border of the Gaza Strip. This ahead of a possible ground invasion.
Storm Babette strikes. A woman in Scotland is swept to her death and hundreds are told to evacuate their homes as the storm takes hold. A red weather warning remains in place for parts of Britain. We'll have the latest.
Ellie, I have to say, I'm always very impressed with how you say red weather warning. It's one of the trickiest tongue twisters in all of broadcasting that we have to say so often. But also, of course, if you're watching at home, please do get involved in the discussion. gbviews@gbnews.com is the address to get in touch, and we'll be looking at some of your comments in the next few minutes. But before all of that, it's time for your morning news update with Tamsin.
Tom, thanks very much and good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 11. The Labour leader says his party has made history after overturning a Conservative majority to win 2 by-elections. Just a warning of flashing images coming up. In Tamworth, Sarah Edwards secured a win, flipping a majority of more than 19,000. Meanwhile, Alistair Stratton claimed Mid-Bedfordshire with a 20.5% swing, marking the largest Labour win in a by-election since 1945. He says he's happy people voted for change.
We have been really humbled by how seriously people have taken this election, this opportunity to do something different, this chance to make sure we finally have an MP in Parliament who's going to be on our side. And I think it's fair to say that after today, no one is going to be taking us for granted here in Mid-Bedfordshire ever again.
Well, Conservative Party Chairman Greg Hand says Labour's wins are not so significant.
Labour hardly improved their vote at all, and in fact went down in Mid-Bedfordshire slightly. But I don't think that will have an impact on the general election. Clearly, we need to recognise that a large number of our Conservative voters did not come out yesterday in Mid-Bedfordshire and Tamworth, despite having excellent candidates in Festus Akinbusoya and in Andy Cooper. So we need to work harder. We need to make sure that people get the government message that we are delivering against the 5 priorities, making progress.
United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is in Egypt to push for aid to flow into Gaza. But the United States says details of a deal to send aid through the Rafah crossing between Sinai and Gaza are still being discussed. Meanwhile, Israeli troops are mobilising along the border of the Gaza Strip ahead of a possible ground invasion. Tanks, troops and helicopters have been seen near the border this morning. Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant told troops yesterday they would soon see the Palestinian enclave from inside. Well, today, IDF international spokesperson Richard Hecht says Israel monitors the situation in Gaza closely.
See, there's a lot of movement of forces. We're organising all the forces for our future stages. And again, our goal military-wise is to dismantle Hamas's capabilities, all the way up to Sinwar. The rocket attacks continue. You're all here. You're seeing them. The humanitarian zone is already opened in the Mawasi area. It's south of Wadi Gaza.
Meanwhile, Israel says it's ordered the evacuation of residents from a northern town close to the Lebanese border. More than 20,000 people live in Kiryat Shimona, which is about a mile from the border fence. The decision to evacuate comes after days of clashes with Hezbollah fighters. Rishi Sunak is travelling to Egypt to prevent further expansion of the Israel-Hamas conflict. The Prime Minister has already met with his Israeli counterpart and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince. In the talks today, he's also expected to stress the importance of preventing further loss of civilian life. At least 9 British nationals have been killed and 7 are missing since the attack by Hamas on October the 7th. Here, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says preventing the escalation should be the top priority.
I think any effort to ensure there isn't any escalation is obviously welcome. I think there are 2 priorities now, urgent priorities. The first is Hamas must release the hostages who are being held in Gaza. And secondly, urgently, we need that humanitarian aid to get in, the food, the water, the fuel, the medicines. Obviously, there's been some progress, but much more is needed. It's urgent. There are, many innocent civilians in Gaza.
Looking to other news now, and minimum service levels are set to be introduced in schools and colleges in England to reduce strike disruption. The government says the proposals will protect children's education during any future industrial action. It follows the action last academic year, which saw 10 days of disruption. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan says how long the plans will take to implement.
I've invited the unions in to have a discussion because we have worked well together to end industrial action, to bring the biggest pay rise that teachers have had in history, and also to introduce a minimum starting salary of £30,000. So we have worked together, and we're working together on reducing workloads. So I have invited the unions in and hope that we have the common interest of protecting children's education. During the strike action, we lost 25 million days of education, and the impact on children is just too much.
More than 1,600 suspected members of county lines and drug gangs have been arrested in 1 week across England and Wales. The operation sees Class A drugs worth more than £1 million and cash of the same value. Around 58 children have been referred to safeguarding services for possible exploitation by the gangs. The action also closed 250 phone lines and seized more than 400 weapons, including firearms and knives. Residents in Brechin may not be able to return to their homes by Christmas, according to a local councillor in Angus in Scotland. Parts of the country are now only accessible by boat as the water level rises to waist height after the River Esk broke its banks. A red weather warning remains in place for parts of Scotland as Storm Babette forces the evacuation of residents also. Amber warnings for wind and rain remain for northern England, the Midlands and northern Wales. A yellow warning has also been issued for Northern Ireland as the storm continues to sweep across the UK. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say play GB News. Now it's back to Elliot and Tom.
Thanks, Tamsin. It's 8 minutes past 11. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Howard and me, Ellie Costello. And we've had so many of your emails in this morning. As always, thank you so much for your company. And Tom, I wanted to ask you about this because I've had a couple of emails in here mentioning the name Boris Johnson. One from Steve, who says, only Boris can save us now. It's a sad day to be a Tory. And one here from Jackie, who says, bring back Boris. He's the only person I'd vote for. And I don't think Steve and Jackie will be alone because for many people, Boris Johnson is an election winner. He won, in their eyes, the 2019 general election. Could we see a comeback of Boris Johnson?
Well, you'd have to have another by-election first, because, of course, Boris Johnson is no longer an MP. He resigned his seat, and, of course, there was that by-election in Uxbridge that the Tories clung on to by the skin of their teeth. But it is interesting. Boris Johnson, whenever he gives speeches, which he does for obscene amounts of money these days, he often refers to the fact that when he resigned as Prime Minister, the Tories were around 5 points behind in the polls, and now they're 20 points behind in the polls. Well, yes, there were 1 or 2 polls that showed 5 points, but there were some others that showed a bit bigger of a gap at that time. And, of course, the big change happened with his successor, Liz Truss, the aftermath of that mini budget and the implications that were thrown onto that, and the lack of sort of clawing back from Rishi Sunak. I wonder, though, if Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister, would every single PMQs be going over the tortured and far too discussed elements of whether or not he had a piece of cake in the cabinet room in July 2020, who was exactly where and when? I mean, all of the intricacies of Partygate, how much more would they be raked over were he still in office? That's something I do think about. However, the other half of this is, before Boris Johnson resigned, we never heard the phrase 13 years of Tory government. It felt like a first term. He could very legitimately go and say to the country, you elected me just 4 years ago, we've had COVID, we've had war, give me another chance. Because we've had so many different prime ministers since then, it's much harder for them to make the argument that this is a new government. And so in the focus groups and certainly when we talk to people up and down the country, they say 13 years of Tory government in a way they they never did when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. And that sense, perhaps, is one of the most damaging things to the Conservative brand. It no longer feels like a fresh government, it feels like a tired government.
Interesting you say that. Michael touches on this, describing Boris Johnson as having charisma. The problem with politicians these days is they have no fire in their belly. But he says both Starmer and Sunak seem completely devoid of any personality. Well, do keep your emails coming in on those by-election wins for the Labour Party. Let us know what you make of that. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Well, sticking with the by-election wins now, these historic swings to Labour, and do they spell long-term trouble for the Conservative Party?
Well, we're joined now by a Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, Sir John Curtis, who is also Tom Harwood's hero, may I add. He's very excited to talk to you this morning, Sir John Curtis. Well, Sir Keir Starmer says the results show that people overwhelmingly want change. And that is fair to say, isn't it? Because they are on an extraordinary run at the moment with Rutherglen, Selby, Mid-Beds and Tamworth. Do you think this is 1996 territory?
Yes, is the short answer to that question. We are certainly at the moment in 1996 territory, A, so far as the position of the opinion polls is concerned, and B, in terms of the results we're now beginning to get in by-elections. So, I mean, the truth is that after the results in July you already referred to, we were asking ourselves, well, which is the more reliable indicator of where the government is at? Is it the result in Uxbridge, only a 7% swing, which, as you said, was successfully defended, or was it that near 24% swing in Selby? Well, we now know the answer. It was the 24-point swing in Selby, which was slightly more than matched in Tamworth, and there was also a 20-point swing in Mid-Bedfordshire. And the last time you will find swings consistently of that order in a previous parliament is the Parliament of 92 to 1997, and in particular, it was the very same Tamworth constituency, albeit then called South East Staffordshire, in which in 1996 there was a 22-point swing from Conservative to Labour.
Sir John, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. We're going to go live to Sir Keir Starmer and we'll come back to you in a moment.
Have been part of. And I think what you've seen here replicates what's going on across the country. People are fed up to the back teeth with 13 years of decline under this government. They want a fresh start. They want to go forward, a positive case with a changed Labour Party, laser-focused on building our economy, rebuilding our living standards across the whole of the country, opportunities for every young person, turning on Great British Energy, making sure our NHS is fit for the future. These are the positive things that we can do as an incoming Labour government. But this constituency has spoken now, loud and clear. No more of the Tories. Yes, please, to Labour. And there were Tory voters yesterday who went to the ballot box to vote Labour. And that is because they are fed up with the decline and despairing at the party they used to vote for. They put their trust and their confidence in us. We accept that victory humbly and go on from here to make the case across the country to usher out 13 years of decline and bring in a positive Labour government and a decade, I hope, of national renewal. Thank you all.
There we have it. Sir Keir Starmer speaking in Tamworth. He has been to both of the constituencies that his party won this morning now, and saying perhaps quite optimistically that he now wants a decade in power. A decade of national renewal was his phrase used there. Let's turn back to Professor Sir John Curtis. It's interesting that the Labour Party is now talking with that sort of confidence. Are we looking at a potential decade in power for the Labour Party? After all, I do remember many reports of Boris Johnson thinking he'd have a decade in power not so long ago.
No, I mean, we have to be careful about what we say might happen in the next 12 months. What might happen after 3 or 4 years of Labour government, who knows? I mean, the one thing that we do know is that whoever forms the next administration will face a very, very difficult situation because basically we've maxed out the credit card, the public services aren't working, and we have record levels of taxation. And the question is, who can manage to grow the economy in order to get us out of that bind? And the answer may be that we discover that Labour struggle and as a result become unpopular quite quickly, however much they win. So that's too far down the track. What we can say, I think, however, coming back to the by-elections, is that we are now in a position that was much the position in 1996. That is, the Conservatives staring defeat in the face, having to turn things around. Perhaps they can turn things around, although I don't think it's going to be easy, again, for partly because of the economic circumstances. And history isn't bound to repeat itself, but the Conservatives do have to turn things around. And it isn't just a case of getting Conservative voters to come out and vote. It didn't before. Actually, the last time we had a Parliament in which turnout kept on falling away was the 1997 to 2001 Parliament. And you know what? The voters didn't turn out in the general election either. And perhaps in particular what Greg Hand should note is if you go back to those by-elections in the 1990s when there were 20% plus swings to Labour, there were also big drops in turnout in those by-elections too, yet they did signify what was coming.
So, John, do you think the electorate is more fickle these days because these swings are happening much faster?
No, I think the honest truth is that we are looking at something that's the product of two major mistakes that were made by the Conservative government. I mean, if you look at the timeline of how public opinion has shifted, it's very much concentrated on around two vital periods. One you've already referred to in your earlier conversation, and that is Liz Truss and her fiscal event and the reaction of the financial markets to that. That was frankly a disaster which cost the Conservatives their reputation for economic competence in much the same way, by the way, that Wednesday destroyed the economic competence in the eyes of the electorate of John Major's government in 1992, something from which they never subsequently recovered. The bits you did miss out, however, about Boris Johnson is that, yes, he was a very successful campaigner in 2019, but it was Partygate and the first revelations about Partygate in December 2021 that saw, and that was the other occasion when there was a precipitate decline in Conservative support. And the truth is the problem that the Conservatives face is that the electorate are reacting, A, to one leader whose veracity is now widely doubted, including, of course, amongst his own MPs, which is why they eventually got rid of him, and B, another whose competence is also now widely doubted. And overcoming those two clouds is very difficult. Labour basically, I mean, Sir Keir Starmer was very keen to claim the credit and say everybody's wanting to vote for a changed Labour Party. Well, the changes of the Labour Party have probably helped Labour to profit from the Conservatives' misfortune. But without those two misfortunes, whether the Labour Party would be in the position they are now, well, none of us knows, but shall we say there's good reason for doubt.
Now, Sir John, I do want you to respond to a viewer comment that we've had in an email this morning from Graham, who has said what isn't being picked up is the swing to the Reform Party. Now, Graham predicts there'll be a hung parliament. I note that the Reform Party did just about hold on to their deposit in Tamworth. Not a big vote for them, but, I mean, these small votes for Reform could matter in certain key seats.
Yeah, they don't increase the likelihood of a hung parliament. They increase the likelihood of the Labour Party winning the election because virtually everybody who says they're going to vote for reform are Leave voters, and Leave voters voted overwhelmingly for the Conservatives back in 2019. But you're right, Tamworth, of course, again, one of the reasons why there was a particular interest was the fact it's a constituency where 2/3 of people voted Leave back in 2016, just the kind of constituency in which Labour were very keen to get back, reconnecting with the electorate while they didn't have any difficulty in Tamworth. But of course, that relatively high support for Leave is reflected in 5% going to Reform. And, one of the problems the Conservatives has is that, there are some Leave voters who are critical of Brexit because in the end it hasn't turned out as they hoped. It's not proved to be as economically successful as they at least think it expected it to be. But equally, there's another group who feel that Brexit just never been pursued properly, it's never been implemented properly, and they are probably the folk who are now more inclined to wander off to Reform. But the problem is, therefore, that Leave coalition that Boris Johnson brought together is now quite badly fragmented.
It's very difficult, of course, for the Tories. If they chase after that, are they abandoning some of those so-called blue wall seats, the more Remain-leaning seats that, of course, Boris Johnson won as well? How do they keep this coalition together? If they chase after one end, do they lose more from the other, or vice versa? I'm afraid we have run out of time for this conversation, Sir John, but thank you very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Are you happy with that? You enjoy it?
Well, no, I think we got some really interesting information out of that.
Yeah. Have you met Sir John in person?
Do you know what? I don't know. I think I might have done. I have.
Oh, good, yes, because I was about to say I think you two need to go for a drink.
Well, no, do you know what? Before the show, we were talking about this, and I told Ellie something rather embarrassing. When I was growing up, I used to watch these old election night programmes, the BBC long-form, sort of 12, 13-hour-long election night programmes, right through from... They go right back to the 1950s, where you can watch these.
Yeah, so whilst I was watching Blue Peter and Art Attack at the age of 12, Tom was watching election night specials. Yes.
1970 was a great one.
Well, there you go.
87 cracker as well.
Do stay with us. We're going to have much more on Storm Babette. We're going to be talking to senior meteorologist John Dale. We're going to be talking about that unprecedented rain and flooding in Scotland, and we'll have our reporter on the ground as well. So do stay with us.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good morning, it's 11:25 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Ellie Costello.
Now, a 57-year-old woman has died after being swept away in a river as Storm Babette batters Scotland.
The Met Office has reissued a rare red weather warning in Aberdeenshire and Angus.
Let's go live now to GB News' Scotland reporter Tony Maguire, who's in Brecon for us this morning. What's the situation on the ground, Tony?
Good morning. Well, certainly the emergency crews here have been working hard. We just saw a shift change about an hour ago where there's a mix of Coast Guard, search and rescue, fire engine and the police as well. The flooding, it seems to be most severe, as we would imagine, down by the banks of the South River Esk. Certainly behind me you can see that there's some trees that we've already seen in the last hour shifting as they have fallen into the water as that bank completely breaks down. Several trees making their way down to the stone bridge, and we're expecting to see some blockages as we go further down. As you mentioned there's been one loss of life just upriver from here now, where a woman was fished out of the river, and certainly up further north towards Aberdeenshire, a man has been trapped in his car for several hours as rescue workers attempted to get to him with the fast-moving and deep floodwater. Now, Angus Council, they had asked up to 400 homes to evacuate around this region. 335 of them were in the Brecon area, and as many as several hundred went up to the rest centres that have been set up all around Angus. Now, we know that from this morning, from talking to a couple of locals, that they're not 100% sure that the pumps have been turned on yet to help move all of this floodwater. And the pictures that you're seeing just now is the main street that runs alongside the South River Esk, and certainly still hundreds of litres of water, thousands indeed. And as we know as well that all the way around this region that there are still some severe issues happening with locals being trapped, some not being able to leave their homes since as early as 7 o'clock last night. Now, Humza Yousaf, Scotland's First Minister, he made the point clear, echoing the plea of the emergency services and local councils. He said, do not travel. If you think you have an appointment, you don't. If you really think you need to get to work, check with your boss. Certainly the message here is we're still within about half an hour of the end of the red weather warning, but we're sure to see the devastation in the next few hours.
Well, Tony Maguire, thank you so much for bringing us that update there in Brecon, and do stay safe there in those high winds, and that water behind you is running incredibly fast as well. So thank you very much, Tony Maguire.
Well, joining us now in the studio is the senior meteorologist Jim Dale. And Jim, is this sort of red weather warning at this time of year in Scotland precedented, or are we looking at something that sort of is a bit new, a bit more violent?
This is the first one since 2020. February, Storm Dennis brought the last red one. So look, when you go through yellow to amber to red, and red is a huge warning. It's a flashing warning, and essentially people should and have, by large part, taken it on board and done the right things. So it's not a case of it being unprecedented. I mean, we've looked around the globe in the last year and two and seen perhaps we could say it's our turn to a small degree. And this particular storm Babette, came up from the Canaries, where record sea temperatures, record land temperatures, the energy got manifested there. It moved up west coast of through the Bay of Biscay, west coast of France, and into ourselves. With all that energy involved in it, the high pressure in Scandinavia, which stopped it going any further, so all the rain came in off the North Sea into the Angus and Aberdeen area, which is why the models and the forecasters actually did a very good job. And I'll say this, not myself necessarily, but meteorologists actually got this 2 or 3 days before and warned that it is going to be an event.
I mean, we heard there from Tony Maguire in Brecon talking about Storm Babette, but we are feeling the effects across the UK, aren't we, Jim, in terms of flooding?
It's still here. Babette is still here. It's a little circulation. It doesn't necessarily feel too strong in the London area, for example, where I came into the studios this morning. In fact, I came without a coat, believe it or not. Why? Because
Jim,
I think I looked at the gap. I know, but I looked at the gap and I thought that gap's going to stay. I'm going to be okay, even going back. So look, that's my job, isn't it? But the point, it's not everywhere. But you're right. That middle section of the UK, North Wales, across the Pennines, and a strip downwards towards the Midlands. They're getting ravaged by the rain at this moment in time, so there will be localised, if not regionalised, floods. It continues. I think we've got another 24 hours. You heard from Brecon that the red one is just about to come to an end, but there's an aftermath, if you like. The rivers still continue to build up from the runoff water off the mountains, the hills. So we watch the space. It's still a danger.
In some ways, is it a point of success? And I use that word with great caution. That we've only seen one fatality. We've seen many people leave their homes. We've seen, and of course, the fatality is a tragedy. But this could have been a lot worse if people didn't follow the warnings, if the prediction of this storm was a lot worse.
Well said. People should heed warnings from professionals, experts who put these things out, whether it be climate change or whether it be pure weather, as in this case. That's where it comes from. These are scientists that say that. They're right most of the time, make it absolutely clear, but spot on. I think most people did the right thing at the right time and got themselves away from harm's reach, did the right thing, didn't mess with Mother Nature.
OK, Jim Dale, always really good to see you. Thank you so much for coming into the studio. Now, still to come, childhood obesity has decreased slightly, but still remains stubbornly high. So what can be done to improve the health of the next generation?
Eat less, move more. Now, Rishi Sunak was branded Dr. Death by the top government scientists in a secret COVID WhatsApp message. What's all that about?
That and much more after your morning news with Tamsin.
Ellie, thank you. Here are the headlines at 11:32. The Labour leader says his party has made history after overturning a Conservative majority to win 2 by-elections. Just a warning of flashing images coming up. In Tamworth, Sarah Edwards secured a win, flipping a majority of more than 19,000. Meanwhile, Alistair Strathen claimed Mid-Bedfordshire with a 20.5% swing, marking the largest Labour win in a by-election since 1945. He says he's delighted people voted for change. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says aid trucks need to move to Gaza as quickly as possible as he arrived in Egypt this morning. But the United States says details of a deal to send aid through the Rafah crossing are still being discussed. Meanwhile, Israeli troops are mobilising along the border of the Gaza Strip ahead of a possible ground invasion. Tanks, troops and helicopters have been seen near the border this morning. Rishi Sunak, meanwhile, is travelling to Egypt to prevent further expansion of the Israel-Hamas conflict. The Prime Minister has already met with his Israeli counterpart and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince. In the talks today, he's also expected to stress the importance of preventing further loss of civilian life. At least 9 British nationals have been killed and 7 are missing since the attack by Hamas on October the 7th. More than 1,600 suspected members of County Line's drug gangs have been arrested in 1 week across England and Wales. The operation seized Class A drugs worth more than £1 million and cash of the same value. Around 58 children have been referred to safeguarding services for possible exploitation by the gangs. The action also closed 250 phone lines and seized more than 400 weapons, including firearms and knives. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2126 and €1.1449. The price of gold is £1,636 and 32 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,443 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, I've just spoken to one of Tom's heroes, Sir John Curtis, and we're going to be talking about one of mine, surely, Dolly Parton.
You get it all on this show.
Yeah, and apparently she's gone to bed with a full face of makeup for the last 40 years. We're going to be talking about why after this.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 11:39 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Ellie Costello and me, Tom Harwood.
And joining us to discuss some top stories today is former Special Advisor Charlie Rowley and author and journalist Hilary Freeman. Good morning to you both. Charlie, let's have a look at this story. that's out this morning. Rishi Sunak was branded Dr. Death by top government scientists in secret COVID WhatsApp messages. Tell us more.
Yes, well, this is during the COVID inquiry, which is ongoing, and it has been revealed that Professor Angela McLean, who's the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, branded Rishi Sunak, when he was the Chancellor, Dr. Death, in relation to the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which was coming in down the track in September. She also described another fellow professor, something that I don't think I can actually say on television, but it's there in asterisks in full.
Oh, right, yeah, I can see that.
And I think what's interesting about the story is not only the fact that the COVID inquiry is ongoing, and it's absolutely right that it's ongoing. Obviously, everybody would want it to be concluding a bit quicker. But these stories that are coming out, we've seen lots of WhatsApp leaks from the political side, from special advisors in fighting at the time. We're now seeing the full context of the medical profession and what they were thinking at the time, and the conflict between the medical profession and the political decisions that have to be made. I just feel that exposing this is the right thing to do, so the public can see the tensions that were there between the medics, who were very, very rigid in their medical assessment and what they felt the remedy was for COVID, versus the actual political decision-making that needed to take place to make sure that the public were going to comply with those rules. So it's a big expose, and I think we're only going to see more as the COVID inquiry continues.
Now, of course, this was all in the context of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which didn't just take away restrictions, it actively encouraged people to go indoors and to eat food together. In that context, Rishi Sunak spending hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' cash to get people indoors inside restaurants in 2020, it doesn't seem like the most sensible thing. Does Dame Angela McLean have a point?
Well, I think she probably does, but I think you've also got to think about the fact that a lot of restaurants were probably going to collapse and go out of business, and that was another reason that this was done, to get people back into the habit of going out to eat. I mean, I don't know if it actually worked in that respect, because I know that I went to places during the Eat Out to Help Out, which I've never been back to since, because I can't afford to. It was easier to afford it then. But, yeah, I mean, it was such a difficult balance, wasn't it, to please everybody, and you couldn't. And I think they were making it up as they went along.
Well, I mean, it's quite remarkable how there wasn't any emphasis on eating outdoors, as we saw later in the pandemic, which we know was so much better. We know that, like, ventilation was such an important thing that just wasn't regarded in the first months of the pandemic. Ellie, did you use Eat Out to Help Out?
I did, it must be said.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if you're... It's actually cheaper at one point. It's remarkable talking about it now, but it's actually cheaper to eat out during those times.
Yes, it was.
Than it was to actually go out and buy food and cook it yourself. Yeah. So I took full advantage at the time.
No, I think we all did. But I mean, I'm looking back at this with the full benefit of hindsight, thinking, what a terrible, terrible waste of taxpayers' money. It would have been better just to give the businesses the cash and not have everyone crowd inside and hasten that second wave.
But he was coming at it, wasn't he, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, and the focus being the economy.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think the other thing to, what we were told, right from the very start by Professor Chris Whitty, is that, lockdown can only be for a time-limited period before people will then naturally start to, just break the rules. So making sure that actually you...
Unlike the government.
But Charlie, if that's the case, why do you need to encourage people into... You can just end the restrictions and people will go back to normal. You don't need to subsidise people eating indoors.
Well, this was I think in September time, so we'd had the lockdown in March, and sort of we'd got through to the summer, and I think prevalence was down, and there we were sort of looking at,
and then it went right back up again.
Economy again. But there were waves and throughout Europe, and so it's something that the inquiry absolutely has to look into. But what's telling about this story is just the language that's been used and just the conflict between the medical profession and the politicians. So let's hope that inquiry gets to the bottom of everything, so we can learn the lessons, so something like this never happens again.
Yeah, and as you say, Charlie, I think there'll be a lot more to come on that story. Hilary, let's take a look at the Times, shall we? And this is potentially good news. Childhood obesity shows slight fall in England.
Yes, I mean, this story is saying that childhood obesity has fallen slightly, but when you actually look into it, it's only by 1%, and it's only gone back to really what it was before the pandemic. And so we still have a massive, pardon the pun, a massive childhood obesity problem in this country, and it is only really getting worse. I think, sorry, the stats aren't on this piece of paper, but I think it's something like 36% of boys are either overweight or obese when they start secondary school, which is a massive figure. And I think also these figures don't take into account the whole cost of living crisis, which will probably make this problem worse because people aren't being able to afford food because it's gone up in so much.
But so often it is actually cheaper to buy the healthy option. It's cheaper to buy a bag of carrots and chop them up and have them as a nice snack than it is to buy the produced, highly calorific sort of options that are ready-made in supermarkets.
Well, it is, but... yes, it is on the surface of it, but you can't make a meal out of one bag of carrots, and that's the problem. By the time you've bought all the ingredients you need and the cooking oil, and you've used the electricity and the gas, it actually ends up being a lot more expensive. So if you're very, very poor, it's actually cheaper just to go to McDonald's or to your local chippy.
I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure
it is, Tom.
I think it's easier. I think it's easier to go to McDonald's. Yeah. I don't think it's cheaper than having a big bag of pasta, putting it on the boil, having it with, a bit of sauce. I mean, you can cook very, as you've seen.
I'm not coming to your house.
I'm not saying it's fine dining. What I'm saying is you can save more money by cooking healthier and cooking for yourself than eating these ready-made options.
I absolutely agree, but I think there's a problem with education, isn't there? People do not know how to cook anymore. They don't know about nutrition. No. Something's gone wrong in schools, and to get us to this point.
Is it down to the schools, though? Should we be going to school? Should our children be going to school to learn about nutrition, or is this something that starts at home and kids need to be brought up saying you can head to the supermarket, you can buy your pasta and your tomato sauce, and you can knock something up that's fairly nutritious, rather than going to McDonald's?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I remember I had cooking lessons, I think, when I was very early in secondary school, I think it was. And I don't know whether that's still on the curriculum. I think it probably should be, just to make sure that people know how to have a happy, healthy life, healthy mind, healthy body and all the rest of it. So, but it comes down to education. Do we ask too much of schools? They'll have breakfast clubs, they have after school.
We heard just last week the Labour Party wants brushing teeth lessons in schools as well. How many aspects of our lives should schools be determined?
Well, I think that does start with the parents, actually, I have to say, because I don't think schools should be, I want to see schools take much more of an interventionist approach. If you've got unruly kids and you've got problems at home in the families, then that's something that I think schools have a responsibility to weigh into. But when it comes to just the basics of brushing your teeth or anything like that, I think that's when you do have to make sure the parents are doing the best that they possibly can.
And I suppose, Hilary, no child is born obese. No. Obese children are a product of bad parenting.
Generally, that is the case. Yes, of course, there are some people who have more genetic predisposition to obesity. And actually, unfortunately, there are apparently now babies being born obese because their mothers are so obese. Oh. And if you are obese when you're pregnant, then you're more likely to have gestational diabetes, which also leads to obesity in your children later on, potentially because of the blood sugar issues. So, yeah, this is a huge, huge problem.
Yeah. Let's have a look at, I'm not sure what paper it is, actually, but this is about King Charles and his biggest regret about his coronation, Charlie.
Yes, it's across a lot of the papers, but this one is from the Express, where King Charles was hosting a reception last night to thank everybody that helped put on the concert and the coronation. But he disclosed to, I think, a chap called Roy, I think it was, or Ray, who was the car parking attendant at the time. He said one of his biggest regrets that he wasn't close enough to the action. He wanted to see the performers like Take That and Lionel Richie. And he said he either wanted to get close to the concert or bring his binoculars.
Oh, I wanted to be closer.
We always think that the party prince was Prince Harry, but maybe we know where it comes from now. The party prince, obviously now King Charles, likes a boogie.
My goodness. I, for one, am glad that his regret was about the concert rather than the spectacle in Westminster Abbey. If he had a regret about that 1,000-year-old ceremony, I'd be a little bit more worried.
Exactly. I think this is lovely because it just humanises him, doesn't it? It does. It makes him like us. And that's what we want, really. We want to be able to relate to the king. Otherwise, they just seem so remote and, such a sort of old-fashioned institution. I think maybe this is slightly deliberate that he wants this this story to get out.
And don't you think it's lovely that it's come from Ray or Roy, the car parking attendant? And that just says it all, doesn't it? Because King Charles does strike me as a monarch who wants to be with the public, who wants to speak to us.
Did you see that remarkable video that came out a couple of weeks ago of
the Ramblers
mountain bikers up in Scotland who just bumped into the king, who was out on a walk, and they stopped. They had 5 minutes of conversation and then went on their way. It's a remarkable video.
They were rambling ramblers by the sound of it. It was a last-minute conversation.
But he does want to speak to the people, doesn't he? It does come across that way.
Yes, yeah. No, I think he's. I think look, we all miss Her Majesty the Queen, and she was such a legend to the country. But he's done a fine job, I think, so far. Long may it continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, we've just got time to talk about my hero, Dolly Parton, who is a legend for many reasons, but this is great, isn't it? She's been sleeping in her makeup for 40 years, Hilary.
Yes. I mean, I'm not sure that if she did try and take it off now that it would be possible. I mean, there's so many layers of it, thicker and thicker and thicker, and with the hair and everything. But yeah, I mean, this is just a fun story, really. Women are always told you must never keep your makeup on; it's terrible for your skin. But yeah, she just doesn't want to go to bed with her husband looking like a hag. She says.
Oh, is that the reason?
Yes.
It's that she's always sort of bright. I thought it was something to do with her having to wake up and go get out early or whatever. No, this is about going to bed looking nice.
It's like her husband has never seen her without makeup, basically, which I kind of think is sad in a way. But yeah, I mean, I've had boyfriends in the past who prefer to tell you not to wear makeup, and I think that's more of a problem. That's more about control, but yeah.
Well, I think we should just have a break in this now, because we've got some news just in that reportedly, GB News has not yet been able to confirm this, but reportedly a second individual has now died in Scotland as a result of Storm Babette, and indeed we're hearing that a tree has fallen on a van. Again, not confirmed yet by GB News, but this is certainly being reported, a second death in Scotland as a result of this storm.
Yeah, Tony Maguire, our Scotland reporter, will be across this for us on GB News. We'll be able to get the latest for us. Right, let's have a little look back at the stories that we were talking about in the papers with Charlie and Hilary. Charlie, looking at Dolly Parton and her story, very much wanting to keep up pretenses for her husband.
Yes, and I think it started because where she lived in the 80s, there was a series of unexpected emergencies, so earthquakes and things. I think she kept it on because she might have to run out of the house, and she didn't want to leave the house without any makeup on. So I think it might have started there and then progressed into not wanting to go to bed with her husband looking like a hag. But I have to say, it has been known that if you are, and I don't want to break the illusion to some of your viewers, but when you do turn up to a TV studio, a little bit of powder is applied or a little bit of makeup.
We look completely different at home.
I might have kept it on.
I definitely
might have kept it on once or twice myself if I was going out on the town afterwards. Just to give yourself a little bit of a lift.
That's the benefit of coming on GB News. You get the use of.
I never got any.
No. Oh, God. Well, this is a scandal. We'll be taking this to our production team immediately.
It really is. It really is the most Dolly Parton story, isn't it? Well, really good to see you both this morning, Charlie Rowley and Hilary Freeman. Thank you so much for your company this morning, and thank you so much for your company at home, for all of your emails and messages throughout the programme. Up next is the Live Desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson, and Pip is here to tell us all about it. What's coming up on today's programme, Pip?
Hello, Ellie. Well, we are going to be talking about Labour's massive victory in those two by-elections, with Sir Keir Starmer saying that Labour is redrawing the political map. Also, this Israel-Hamas conflict. We are now getting information that the Israeli Defence Forces has published new information about the status of hostages. This is just coming in as I speak, but we do understand that over 20 of them are children under the age of 18. There's 200, just over 200 hostages being held. The majority of the hostages are alive. We will bring you the latest on that breaking news at the top of the Live Desk. Stay with us.
Well, we look forward to hearing it, and indeed that is the end of the Britain's Newsroom show today. Coming up, of course, next is the Live Desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson, where we'll be hearing, amongst other things, on that breaking news story about the Israeli hostages. We'll be back with Britain's Newsroom on Monday at 9:30.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. More rain over the next day and a half is likely to exacerbate the flooding situation. A number of weather warnings remain in place. Please do check the Met Office website and app for the details of those. The heaviest rain today is going to be across parts of England and Wales. The rain has eased a little across parts of eastern Scotland, but it will return here. Parts of England and Wales, they're bearing the brunt of the heavy rain, as I said, particularly across parts of northeast England, but also parts of Wales and the Midlands have had a very, very wet morning. The rain moving back into Northern Ireland too. Something a bit brighter in the south. Could see temperatures of 17 Celsius, but for many feeling a lot cooler than that, especially with this wind coming in from the North Sea. And the rain will continue over northeast England well into the evening and overnight. And look at that, it then pushes back further north into eastern Scotland. Of course, the area worst affected by Storm Babette, and that strong wind will continue to feed the moisture and the rainfall in here through the night and into Saturday. We'll continue to see some showers further south. It'll be quite a mild night here, but that rain continuing in eastern and northern Scotland tomorrow, likely to exacerbate the flooding situation here. But we also need to watch the heavy showers across the south during tomorrow, and also potentially some very gusty winds along the south coast. There's still a lot going on with the weather at the moment, so as I said, please do keep up to date with those weather warnings. Check out the Met Office website for all the details.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.